Ma'am, remain seated. Don't touch anything. The voice cut through the cabin cold, emotionless, offering no explanation. In that moment, no one asked who she was. No one turned back to look again. The woman in seat 18A was immediately placed into the category of the irrelevant someone not worth listening to, someone without value in this emergency. Her name was Hannah Cole, headphones still on, a worn jacket brushing the back of her seat. No uniform, no insignia, not a single sign suggesting she deserved attention. Then the intercom crackled to life. The captain's voice trembled, made it halfway through a sentence, then broke off. Static filled the air for a few brief seconds, long enough to freeze the entire cabin. After that, complete silence. No one spoke. No one knew what to do. That silence was not ordinary. It was heavy, pressing against people's chests. A cup slipped and hit the floor. A child began to cry. Someone whispered a prayer. Everyone understood that something was terribly wrong, yet no one was calm enough to face it. And in that exact moment, the woman who had just been ordered to stay silent slowly removed her headphones. She stood up. No panic. No asking for permission. No searching for approving eyes. As the cabin began to sink into chaos, only one person remained perfectly composed. The chaos had begun, and the only person who stood up was the very one who had just been treated as if she did not exist. If you believe that courage does not truly live in the sound of gunfire, but in the quiet of those who have passed through war, then subscribe to Veterans Legacy Stories so that together we may preserve the memories, the dignity, and the reverence owed to our silent heroes. Hannah Cole did not react immediately. She did not ask questions. She did not turn her head. She allowed no expression that could be mistaken for panic to surface. She remained seated back straight, both feet planted firmly on the cabin floor, as if her body were already accustomed to waiting in situations far worse than this. She calmly removed her headphones. No sudden pull, no haste. She placed them neatly into the worn cuff of her jacket. An instinctive motion repeated hundreds of times during years when life and death were separated by a single wrong decision. Hannah's right hand rested against her chest. Not out of fear, but because the metal dog tag pressed against her skin, cold, solid, unmistakably real. A small weight, yet heavy enough to anchor her exactly where she needed to be. A place where responsibility always came before emotion. A place where trained reflexes replaced panic. Her breathing slowed, steady, controlled. While the people around her began to breathe faster, Hannah deliberately lowered her own heart rate. She did not need a watch. Her body knew when to slow down and when to accelerate. That instinct was not forged in a gym, but in moments spent waiting for orders at dangerous altitudes inside confined spaces, under conditions where a single mistimed breath could cost an entire team. The engine hummed steadily, but Hannah heard what others could not. A subtle deviation in vibration so slight, it went unnoticed by nearly everyone else. The rate of descent did not feel normal. Something was off, not enough to spark panic, but enough to trigger an alert in someone who had learned to live by sound and sensation rather than sight. She did not need to see the instruments to know the aircraft was losing its natural stability. Hannah Cole was in her 30s. Her body was compact and resilient in the way of someone who did not need to display strength. Shoulders squared, back firm, her posture restrained. Not a performative kind of beauty, but the beauty of discipline, the kind that made others trust that this body knew exactly what to do when everything slipped beyond control. She was used to being underestimated. Early in her years of service, Hannah learned a simple truth: the quiet ones are almost always judged the lowest. And for that very reason, they hold the greatest advantage when the decisive moment arrives. She heard whispers spreading through the cabin, fragmented questions, groundless assumptions. Hannah did not engage. She did not need their information. What she needed was already stored in memory: similar situations, false alarms that had turned real moments when a single second of delay had pushed everything beyond recovery. The hand on her chest tightened briefly, then relaxed. No prayers, no requests for luck. Just a silent reminder: focus. Hannah did not know what had happened to the captain. She did not know who would step forward to handle the situation. But she knew one thing with absolute certainty: if no one acted, the consequences would come fast. And when they did, there would be no room left for hesitation. She lifted her head, not to seek attention, but to listen one more time to the engine, the vibration of the fuselage, the subtle shift in air pressure. The kinds of signals only those who had lived inside cockpits, who had landed under imperfect conditions, could truly recognize. Hannah Cole still had not stood up. But in that moment, the decision had already been made. She knew this silence would not last. And when it was broken, every set of eyes would begin searching for someone willing to carry the weight of responsibility. She had not spoken yet. But in the next moment, that very silence would be shattered by the crowd's desperate calls. A flight attendant rushed down the aisle, breath breaking, her voice cracking with fear. "Is there any pilot on this flight? Anyone?" The question echoed through the cabin like a raw plea for help. There were no formalities left, no procedures, only fear spreading faster than air itself. Heads turned toward one another, eyes searched. A few hands tightened around armrests. A man sprang halfway to his feet as if about to say something, then hesitated. His eyes wavered. His shoulders sagged. He sat back down quietly, as though realizing he was not the answer everyone was looking for. The silence stretched on for a few more seconds. Then, from somewhere behind, a soft chuckle broke out. Not malicious, not loud, but sharp enough to slice through the tension. She looks like a backpacker. A light remark. No insults. No crude offense. Yet it struck its target more precisely than any harsher words could have. Hannah Cole heard it. She did not turn around. She did not react, but she knew exactly what had just happened. She had been turned into an example, a convenient symbol of shared helplessness. When people are afraid, they need someone to reassure themselves that the danger does not involve them. And the silent woman in seat 18A was the easiest choice. No one asked Hannah whether she could fly a plane. No one asked what she had done or what she had been through. No one even considered the possibility. Eyes swept past her and settled on others, those who looked more appropriate. People whose appearances made the crowd feel safer. A suit jacket, gray hair, a loud voice. But one by one, they all avoided the collective gaze. No one stood up. Hannah Cole remained seated. She was used to this. Throughout her years of service, Hannah had learned that recognition rarely comes before action. And sometimes it never comes at all. People like her are usually noticed only after everything has crossed the boundary of safety, when no one else is left to step forward. She felt eyes flick over her quickly, superficially, then move on. Not curious looks, but excluding ones. As if the entire cabin had silently agreed that she did not belong in this equation of survival. Humiliation did not arrive with a loud remark. It arrived through the crowd's silent consensus. A woman clutched her child tightly. A man bowed his head, murmuring something like a prayer. Others stared straight ahead, waiting for someone else to rise. No one was waiting for Hannah. She was not openly insulted, but she was erased from the possibility of being trusted. And that was the deepest form of humiliation. Hannah Cole, in her 30s, had the compact, resilient build of someone trained in both body and discipline. Yet in this moment, everything she was reduced to a hastily applied label, not suitable. She was not angry, not hurt in the usual way. Only a familiar sensation crept in the feeling of being underestimated, overlooked, or treated as though she did not exist. That feeling did not weaken her. It sharpened her focus. Hannah placed both hands on her knees. Her fingers tightened briefly, then relaxed. A small reflex enough to keep herself in a state of readiness. She did not look at the crowd. She stared straight ahead, where everyone else was waiting for a miracle from someone else. She knew this waiting could not last. She knew every passing second carried risk. And she also knew that very soon, this collective dismissal would collide head-on with reality, a reality that does not care about prejudice or appearances. And when no one else stepped forward, Hannah's silence would turn into action. The cockpit was locked. Not an ordinary lock. Not something that could be handled with explanations or reassurance. It was a rigid, cold protocol designed to prevent any outside intervention when a serious incident occurred. The co-pilot stood outside, one hand on the auxiliary control panel, his eyes flicking between indicators that were changing faster than normal. He knew what that meant. And he also knew he was trapped outside the very place where he should have been. The aircraft began to lose its stable configuration. Not a violent drop that would trigger instant panic. Just a series of small, continuous changes, enough for someone with experience to sense that the trajectory was slowly drifting off. The numbers no longer looked right. The responses were no longer consistent. Time began to turn into an enemy. In the passenger cabin, tension spread quietly. No screaming, no emergency announcements. The human body can sense when things slip beyond the safe zone. A few people began gripping their armrests. Others looked at one another, as if waiting for someone to step forward and do the right thing. Hannah Cole moved forward. She did not push. She did not shove anyone aside. She did not need to draw attention to herself. Her steps were steady, measured like someone who had walked through narrower corridors than this in situations where every step carried risk. Her build was compact and balanced, carrying the unspoken confidence of someone accustomed to responsibilities larger than herself. She stopped in front of the flight attendant. She did not lower her head. She did not ask for permission. Just one sentence, short, precise, without a wasted word, opened the cockpit. "I can fly." No introduction, no explanation, no proof offered. Yet the voice was not reckless. It carried something that those in the profession recognize immediately, the certainty of someone who had stood in that position before, who had issued commands in moments that allowed no mistakes. The flight attendant froze, not because she didn't believe her, but because her mind was racing to keep up with the speed of the situation. Every training protocol said this was not an option to be considered. But Hannah Cole's eyes allowed no delay. They were not pleading, not defiant. They were the eyes of someone who knew with absolute clarity that if action was not taken immediately, everything would slip beyond anyone's control. 3 seconds of silence passed. 3 seconds long enough for a fatal decision to be made, and short enough to save hundreds of lives if the decision was the right one. The flight attendant's hand trembled slightly as she followed the technical instructions Hannah had just given, procedures not found in passenger service manuals mentioned only in specialized training. Details known only to those who had worked close to the cockpit. No one in the cabin spoke up in protest. The crowd, noisy only minutes earlier, fell silent, not because they understood what was happening, but because instinct told them that control no longer rested with them. Noise would not help, and the woman who had just stepped forward carried somehow the sense that she knew exactly what she was doing. Hannah Cole did not look back at anyone. She did not need consensus. She did not need encouragement. In the world she once belonged to, responsibility was never shared with a crowd. It belonged to the one who stepped forward to claim it. Power had not yet been officially reversed. No one stood at attention. No words of recognition were spoken. No title was announced. But in that moment, power had already left the crowd, left the confused glances and faulty assumptions, and focused on a single person, the one who dared to step forward, while everyone else was still waiting. And when the door ahead was finally no longer a barrier, silence would give way to the first action that would be recognized. The cockpit door opened. No further explanation was needed. A single glance was enough to understand that the situation had moved beyond every standard procedure. The captain lay unconscious in his seat, head tilted to one side, face pale. He was still breathing, but shallowly and unevenly. The instruments in front of them were not waiting for anyone. Altitude was dropping faster than permitted. Time was not on the side of anyone in that cabin. Hannah Cole stepped inside. She did not pause to take in the whole scene. She did not look for confirming eyes. She did only one thing. She scanned the control panel. A glance quick enough for the untrained to miss, yet deep enough for someone who had once sat in that seat to immediately know where everything had gone wrong. She did not ask. She did not introduce herself. She did not explain why she was there. Her body moved with the precision of someone intimately familiar with this space. No wasted motion, no hesitation. Her fingers landed exactly where they needed to be. Her posture was stable, grounded, as if this were not the first time she had faced a situation where hundreds of lives depended on the smallest decisions. Hannah Cole was in her 30s. Her build was compact and strong in the way of someone shaped by long training, not display. There was none of the visible tension often seen in people thrust into an unexpected role. Only absolute focus, the kind forged over years' tours of standing before choices that allowed no mistakes. She spoke. Just one sentence. "I've got the aircraft." No raised voice. No emphasis. No coercive command. Yet it was not a request. It was a statement, clean, clear, leaving no room for doubt. The co-pilot looked at her. At first, his eyes carried a trace of confusion, the natural reflex of someone who had just been displaced from a position that should have been his. Then his gaze settled on Hannah's hands, on the way she read the instruments on her comm, that needed no display. He saw what only those in the profession could recognize: familiarity. Certainty. Something that could not be faked. He did not ask who she was. He did not demand proof. He did not need a service record or rank, just a single nod. And his voice changed completely. No more hesitation. No more defensiveness. "You have control." There was no ceremony. No formal declaration. No one stood at attention or spoke her name. It was simply a quiet but decisive transfer, The moment when control left chaos and settled into the hands of someone capable of carrying it. Inside that cockpit, Hannah Cole was no longer the silent woman from seat 18A, but neither did she become a hero in any loud sense. She was simply the person doing exactly what needed to be done at the one moment that allowed no error. The co-pilot stepped back half a pace, not because he was pushed aside, but because he understood his role had changed. From the one in command to the one in support. From the center of decision to the one who kept this space quiet enough for the other to focus. Hannah said nothing more. She did not need confirmation that she was trusted. The trust had already been shown through action. And for people like her, that was the only kind of recognition that mattered. Altitude continued to fall. Time continued to move. But from that moment on, there was order. Not because danger had vanished, but because at last someone had stepped forward to take responsibility for every second that followed. And once control rested in her hands, the next voice to be heard would no longer be a plea for help, but a request meant to be listened to. Hannah Cole's voice came through the air traffic control frequency, low, concise, carrying no excess emotion. Requesting immediate priority landing. I'm the acting pilot in command. There was no long explanation, no justification offered, just a fact placed on the table at exactly the right moment. On the other end of the line, silence lingered for a few beats, not because they hadn't heard her, but because they were weighing the gravity of what had just been said. A commercial flight. The captain incapacitated. The person claiming control not listed on the flight crew. Then the question came measured and cautious. Identify yourself. Hannah Cole did not change her tone. She did not raise her voice. She did not try to persuade. Call sign Raven 7. Just 3 words. No more, no less. The silence on the other end shifted. It was no longer ordinary doubt. It was the pause of people who understood the meaning of a call sign that never appears in civilian records. They did not ask further questions. They did not demand circuitous verification. Familiar procedures were compressed into swift decisions because there are names that require no explanation, only to be heard. Inside the cockpit, the co-pilot glanced at Hannah. His eyes settled on her hands on the controls. Small movements. Economical. Precise. Not a single wasted action. Not a reflex out of place. The way she adjusted the rhythm did not resemble someone newly taking over. It resembled someone who had lived with these limits, who had made decisions where every number carried a cost. He did not ask where she had trained. He did not ask what aircraft she had flown. He asked only one question, quiet enough not to break concentration. Military Hannah Cole did not turn toward him. Her gaze remained forward where everything still needed to be held within control. Used to be. No pride, no evasion, no diminishing of it. Just a chapter that had closed in time yet had never been erased from who she was. In her 30s, Hannah carried the calm of someone who had crossed enough dangerous thresholds to understand that identity is not something to be announced in moments like these. What mattered more was capability, and her capability was showing itself in every small adjustment, every decision made at exactly the right second. The co-pilot did not ask again. He did not need to know which unit she had served and what rank she held or how she had left the military. Those questions would not stabilize this aircraft. The only thing he needed now was the certainty that the person beside him knew precisely what to do in the minutes ahead. And he believed it. On the air traffic control frequency, instructions began to come through, brief, clear, without excess detail. Hannah listened and responded in rhythm, neither interrupting nor delaying. Every reply revealed one truth: this was not the first time she had stood in a situation where all eyes were fixed on her, even if no one knew her real name. There was no praise, no public recognition, only seamless coordination among people who understood the value of silence at the right moment. Hannah's body remained steady, shoulders squared, back firm, the restrained posture of someone accustomed to remaining calm so others can lean on it. She did not need to remind herself of responsibility. Responsibility had already woven itself into the way she breathed, the way she thought, the way she responded under pressure. Hannah Cole's identity was revealed just enough, not to spark unnecessary curiosity, not to create a legend too soon. Only enough for those who needed to know, to understand, that in this position, at this moment, they could safely entrust the lives of hundreds of people to someone who had carried heavier burdens before. She did not claim credit. She did not revisit the past. She carried no story beyond the one unfolding right now. Because for people like Hannah, truth does not need to be spoken. It is proven through action. And as the aircraft drew closer to a safe landing, the silence in the cabin would slowly transform into a new understanding that the quiet woman had brought them home, and that the world would now have to learn how to see her differently. The aircraft touched down safely on the runway. There was no applause, no cheering, no one jumping up in celebration. Only a silence that filled the cabin, heavy, slow, like a collective apology. No one dared to speak aloud. People were still trying to understand what had just happened. They looked at one another, looked straight ahead, looked down at their own hands as if waking from a terrible dream. The feeling of survival did not arrive with sudden joy, but with stunned stillness. Because somewhere deep inside, everyone knew that if things had gone even slightly wrong, they would not still be sitting here. And while that realization had not yet fully settled, Hannah Cole had already left the cockpit. She did not wait for thanks. She did not stay to receive attention. She walked as if she had just completed a task that needed to be done, nothing more, nothing less. For her, this moment was not about recognition, but about knowing when to step away. Hannah was in her 30s. Her build was compact and steady in the way of those who have carried responsibility without needing reminders. There were no obvious signs of fatigue, no lingering tension, only a very small, very private sense of relief, like the moment a familiar weight is finally set down. A young staff member standing nearby watched her go. He hesitated. His hands clenched, then loosened. His throat tightened with a feeling he couldn't quite name, part shame, part gratitude, part confusion. Finally, he spoke, his voice stumbling, unsure whether he even had the right to say it. We didn't believe you." The words carried no excuse, no attempt to blame the circumstances, just a rough truth spoken too late, a simple admission that they had misjudged her, that they had misread her, that they had removed a human being from the possibility of trust simply because of her quiet presence. Hannah Cole stopped, just for a moment. She did not fully turn around. She did not need to face him directly to create pressure. Her voice came softly, clear enough to be heard, but not loud enough to become a lecture. "It's all right. When it matters, just don't get in the way. No reproach, no lesson delivered, no demand for repentance. Just a reminder that in the most critical moments of life, honor does not need to be believed in advance. It does not need to be proven through words, recognition, or admiring looks. That kind of honor requires only one thing: to not be obstructed when it needs to act." The young staff member stood still. He said nothing more. But something had changed in his eyes. Not fear, not blind reverence, but a late realization that silence does not mean incapacity, and that those who speak the least sometimes carry the greatest responsibility. Hannah Cole did not wait for that change to be acknowledged. She continued walking. She had been in situations where apologies never came. She had witnessed poor decisions made simply because capable people were pushed aside. She did not need the world to be more perfect after today. She only needed it to learn how to step back when necessary. The silence slowly dissolved, giving way to cautious movement. But no one forgot the feeling they had just lived through, the feeling of surviving, not by luck, but because someone did the right thing, without needing to be trusted first. And in that very moment, the true lesson began to settle quietly, without display, but deep enough to remain. And as the woman disappeared from their sight, the question was no longer who she was, but whether this world was ready to learn how to respect people like her. Hannah Cole disappeared into the airport in a way that very few people noticed. No one ran after her calling her name. There were no cameras, no questions. She blended into the flow of people hurrying back to their lives, carrying a light bag and the stride of someone accustomed to leaving the center once the mission is complete. No name, no interviews, no public record. The people who had just shared the cabin with her were still absorbed in the feeling of survival. They called their loved ones. They embraced one another. They spoke of a miracle that had brought them safely back to the ground. But no one knew what to call that miracle or who it was. Only later, when everything had settled, when internal reports were quietly reviewed, did a few scattered pieces emerge, a name appearing in a system not meant for the public, a file tightly sealed with brief lines and more blank space than information. A female aviation special operations service member, formerly active. Someone who had landed in conditions most civilian pilots would never face. Not just once. Hannah Cole was not someone who wanted to be remembered. She did not leave the military to become an inspirational story. She left to live a quiet life where skills honed under the highest pressure would be used only when truly necessary. And that day, they were used at exactly the right time. Flight 482 survived. 200 people returned home. 200 lives continued with ordinary mornings, familiar dinners, promises not yet spoken. Most of them would never see the woman from seat 18A again. They might forget her face. They might not remember exactly how her voice sounded. But there was one thing they would carry with them even if they could not name it right away. They began to listen before they dismissed. Not everyone changed instantly. Not every prejudice vanished after a single flight. But in the smallest moments of daily life, when a quiet person enters a room, when someone unassuming stands off to the side, someone will hesitate before judging. Someone will remember that heavy silence inside the cabin. And they will wonder whether they are overlooking a person simply because they do not look the way they expect. That is the legacy Hannah Cole left behind. Not medals, not titles, not people standing at attention or belated praise. Legacy is not the moment others bow before you. Legacy is the moment they learn to stand in the right place before the truth, even when that truth comes as from someone they never expected. Hannah Cole did what needed to be done, and then she left. Like so many women who have served in silence, carrying their discipline, memories, and dignity into everyday life. They do not ask to be remembered, but the world owes them a deeper respect, quieter, more deliberate, and offered at the right time. Because true courage is not loud. It does not demand recognition. It appears when needed, holds firm to what must be held, and then steps back so life can continue. And if we are perceptive enough to notice, humble enough to listen, then people like Hannah Cole will no longer be erased from the equation in the most critical moments. Veterans' legacy stories. We remember the quiet heroes. If this story makes you believe that honor and kindness never retire, please share this video and subscribe to Veterans' Legacy Stories so that none of their memories are ever forgotten.